everyone! So recently I posted an intro video for a project that I made for OpenAI's Build Week. That project is called Inkform, and that previous video was more of a demo for the hackathon itself, so I wanted to make a follow-up video detailing the actual code. So what's Inkform? It's a Vercel application where you upload a photo of your own handwriting and you get a font. So for example, here's a photo of my handwriting, and here's that same handwriting typed as a downloadable font. A real TTF file that you can install on your computer and use in any application that takes fonts. And yes, there's some websites out there that do this, but they all seem to require an account or some sort of trial, and I just wanted to make something that was as easy to use as possible. So for this, there's no account. There's no server that's processing your photo, no upload to some cloud pipeline. You just upload one photo of your own handwriting, so whatever note that you have. It doesn't need to be like a special worksheet with boxes for every character that I saw on some websites, just any sort of note. So Inkform looks at the strokes in that image and figures out your personal style. So how heavy the ink is, how upright or slanted the letters are, whether it's cursive or print, and then it generates a complete legible character set in that style. Every uppercase and lowercase Latin letter, digits, punctuation, and accented characters. You get a live preview where you can type any sentence and see it rendered in your handwriting, and then you can download an actual TrueType font file. So the entire thing, reading the image, figuring out your letter forms, building the font file byte by byte, that happens inside your browser tab in WebAssembly compiled from Rust. So there's two things that make this a little harder than it sounds. First, it's a freeform photo that we're accepting and extracting data from, not any sort of guided template. There's no reliable way to know which pixels correspond to which character unless the handwriting sample happens to spell out something that Inkform can read. So the system can't just crop 62 boxes and call them glyphs. Second, everything in this project needs to run client-side in the browser because of how it's hosted. So Inkform is deployed on Vercel's free hobby tier, because I'm a poor grad student right now, okay? Hobby doesn't give you an always-on backend. You get serverless functions with tight execution limits, no persistent server you can lean on for heavy computation. Image processing and font assembly are exactly that kind of heavy, unpredictable duration work that's usually a bad fit for this model. So the design decision was, let's not fight the hosting tier, let me just route around it. So do all the actual generation work in the browser on the user's own machine using WebAssembly. The Vercel deployment becomes just a static Next.js app, plus a couple of small dev-only API routes, no backend compute in the critical path at all. That single constraint is why this project has a Rust core instead of, say, like a Node image processing pipeline. Rust compiles cleanly to WASM, giving you real performance for pixel-level image work, and most importantly, letting you write one deterministic implementation that's shared between automated tests and what actually ships to the browser. You're not maintaining a Python prototype and a separate JS production version that can drift apart, which I've done in the past. There's a nice side effect too. Since your photo never leaves the browser, no server ever sees your handwriting, and you don't need an account system or persistence layer at all. It's kind of anonymous by default because the architecture doesn't have anywhere else to put your data. Now, let's talk about the repo structure. So the repo is a cargo workspace plus a Next.js app. There's three main pieces to it. First, you have the crates Inkform core, and this is the actual brain. It has the validation, handwriting extraction, glyph synthesis, preview generation, and TrueType font assembly. There's no browser APIs, no I/O besides the bytes that you hand it. This is the part with the real test suite. And then you have crates Inkform WASM, a thin wrapper crate around Inkform core. Its job is translation. You take raw bytes from the browser, call into the core crate, and serialize the result back out as JSON that JavaScript can consume. And then you have the front end. That's the Next.js app. The upload UI, live preview, and download flow. It loads the compiled WASM module and calls it directly from client-side code. So every decision about how a letter gets its shape, how strokes get read from a photo, how the font binary gets its bytes, all of that lives in Rust. The front-end's job is upload, display, and download. That separation is also what makes the core crate independently testable without the browser at all. Most of the Rust test suite runs as plain cargo tests with no WASM runtime involved. So when you upload a photo, here's the actual sequence of Rust function calls that run in order. First, you have validate sample, and then you have extract handwriting with transcript. That goes into generate font with transcript. Then you have the glyph grammar component, and then you build TTF binary. That feeds into the preview text function / build preview SVG function. So stage 1 is validate. Validate sample is the gate. It looks at the sample image and the target script pack. Right now that's just Latin extended, upper and lowercase Latin letters, digits, common punctuation, and accented characters, and it decides whether the image is even usable. This produces a validation report with an accepted flag and human readable notes. If the photo is unusable, if it's like too small or too sparse or whatever, the user finds out immediately instead of just getting a garbage font 5 seconds later. Stage 2 is the extract. This is the biggest file in the codebase. It's over 1,000 lines. Extract handwriting with transcript reads the raw strokes out of the photo. The core technique is centerline extraction, using bounded Jiang-Schwen thinning on an adaptive resolution bitmap. In plain terms, it takes the dark ink pixels and iteratively erodes them down into 1 pixel wide skeleton. The same family of techniques is used in classic OCR and fingerprint processing pipelines. Here's the important design decision though. Inkform does not try to map every extracted stroke into a specific letter. It only reuses a stroke directly, meaning that it redraws that exact pixel trajectory in the final font. When that stroke has a bounded simple shape, 1 or 2 trajectories, no crazy branching. Connected cursive handwriting, where 5 letters are physically 1 continuous ink blob, produces skeletons that split into many branches. Those branchy blobs get thrown out as unusable for direct replay and instead just inform the style. So how heavy, how slanted, how loopy it is, rather than being forced into a specific character. That distinction between style signal and literal replay runs through the entire generation pipeline. So stage 2 is the transcript. There's a field in the UI where you can type out what your handwriting sample actually says, and this unlocks a much more precise path. If you write hello and you type hello into the transcript box, Inkform tries to align the actual characters to the actual pixel regions. It isolates terminal punctuation, then partitions the word at low ink valleys, the gaps between letters, using the transcript to predict roughly how wide each character should be. Critically, it only accepts an anchor, meaning that these exact pixels are the letter H. After that region passes shape validation. If a letter is closed, like an O or an E with a full loop, or dotted, like I, or crossed like T, or made of multiple strokes, the alignment step deliberately backs off and lets that character fall back into the synthesized grammar instead of trying to force a bad trace. Better to draw a clean synthetic E than replay a smeared illegible one. When it does succeed, that exact trace centerline becomes the source of truth for that character. It also becomes the primary signal for that character's advance width, so how much horizontal space it takes up, rather than relying on a generic fixed spacing value for the whole font. Stage 3 is generation and glyph grammar. Generate font with transcript is the orchestrator here, but the real letterform logic lives in glyph grammar module. It's a rule-based system that knows structurally what every character in the Latin extended set is supposed to look like. So the stems, bowls, counters, crossbars, ascenders, descenders, and it renders each one using the style signals pulled from your photo. Stroke, weight, slant, roundedness, how connected your handwriting reads as. A few specific rules worth calling out here though, because they came from real failures on some handwriting samples that I submitted. So for strongly cursive samples, only characters with naturally open terminals get a thin connecting stroke drawn to overlap the next glyph. Closed bowls and counters don't get a fake connector because legibility wins over authentic cursive flow. And then the grammar avoids retracing a single stem twice within one outline, because that pinches the generated glyph into a bow tie shape instead of a clean stroke. So none of this is a neural network guessing at letter forms, which I was kind of tinkering with the idea of doing for this, but it turned out not to be the path forward for this one. It's just an explicit deterministic rule set here. Stage 4 is the TTF assembly. The largest file in the project by a wide margin is the true type assembler. This writes an actual binary font file table by table. The SFNT table directory, glyph outlines, the CMap character to glyph mapping, horizontal metrics, vertical metrics, name records, with typed error handling instead of panics anywhere in the path. Every generated outline gets normalized into a fixed vertical design range before it's written into the font. Freeform handwriting extraction can otherwise produce glyphs that just blow past the standard 1000-unit EM square, and this is a real bug that happened during development. Windows Font Viewer would silently scale the preview down until it just looked like a blank page. Finally, we have stage 5, which is the preview. So preview text and build preview SVG take the finished font artifact and a string of text that you type in and produce both a render plan and an SVG preview. So what you see in the browser is a genuine representation of your generated font, not a mockup. So that's the Rust side. How does all of this actually reach the browser though? Crate's Inkform WASM exposes one main entry point to JavaScript, generate font JSON. It takes the raw image bytes, width, height, your preview text, and your optional transcript, and internally calls the validate sample. Then generate font with transcript, then builds the preview SVG, chaining all 5 pipeline stages that we just walked through, and hand serializes the whole result into one JSON string. Validation notes the font family name and glyph count, a hash of the binary, and the actual font bytes as a JSON array, plus the SVG markup for the live preview. On the front-end side, there's a small engine module that loads that compiled WASM module lazily into the browser, reads the uploaded file as bytes, reads its image dimensions, and calls straight into generate font JSON. There's a build time detail worth mentioning here because it caused me some real pain. WASM pack generates a JS wrapper that tries to resolve the WASM binary via a relative URL at bundle time. TurboPack, which is Next Bundler, doesn't like resolving that path directly, so the build script patches the generated wrapper to load the WASM binary from a fixed public URL instead, and copies the JS wrapper itself into the next source tree so it gets properly bundled rather than fetched as a raw public asset at runtime. From the outside, it's 3 sections. The landing page explains the flow and hosts the generator workbench. The generate part of the page takes your photo upload and optional transcript field. The results part of the page loads the live SVG preview of your typed text rendered into your handwriting-derived font. And it lets you try different preview texts against the same generated font. And then it gives you the option to download a true type font. Everything after you hit generate, validation, extraction, glyph synthesis, TTF assembly, preview rendering, that all happens in the time it takes one WASM call to return. No loading spinner waiting on a network round trip to a server because there is no server. For OpenAI's Build Week, though, we're required to use codecs. And traditionally, I do a mix of manual coding and a little bit of AI coding. So I want to put a few things in here that I had to tell codecs to keep the build on track. First, I had scripts check sh, which runs cargo format check, Clippy with warnings promoted to errors, and the full test suite, the standard pre-commit gate. Then I had the fact that Rust code had to follow very hard constraints. So no unsafe Rust here, no unwrap. I told it to avoid unnecessary clones, typed error enums instead of strictly typed errors or panics. And here, the CI just doesn't parse the generated font with one library and call it done. It validates a deterministic generated TTF against 3 independent native platform parsers. So you have FreeType on Linux, you have Cortex on macOS, and you have GDI on Windows. That cross-platform check is what caught some real sneaky bugs, which included a CMap format 4 table using the wrong byte multiplier for its binary search fields, which parsed fine actually on some platforms like Linux machine, for example, but then it silently failed to render on my Windows machine. So there's now a permanent regression test for exactly that invariant. Because the Vercel hobby build can't compile the Rust workspace at deploy time, root directory isolation only gives it the front-end folder. The compiled WASM artifacts are committed to the repo, and CI's job is to rebuild them from source and fail the build if what's committed has drifted from what the Rust code actually produces. That keeps the deploy binary honest without needing Rust in the deployment environment at all. The project also keeps a running decision log, agents MD, that records not only what was built, but why, and failure cases like that cursive E cross counter bug, the Windows scaling to blank bug, the CMAP multiplier bug, so those constraints don't get silently reintroduced by future changes that look reasonable in isolation but then reopens an already solved problem. So with those things, I was actually able to keep it pretty much on track. But to be upfront about where this stands, this version, which I'm kind of calling version 1, guarantees Latin extended coverage only. So unfortunately, no CJK, no other scripts yet by design, so the project isn't overclaiming Unicode support that it can't back up right now. And also, since there's no account system, there's no long-term storage of your handwriting sample either. Every session starts completely fresh. And a freeform photo fundamentally can't guarantee a literal verified reconstruction of every single character the way a guided box template could, which is exactly why the glyph grammar exists, to keep unseen or ambiguous characters legible and stylistically consistent, even when the source photo can't literally prove what they look like. So yeah, that's Inkform, end to end. A photo goes in, a deterministic Rust pipeline extracts real stroke data and blends it with the rule-based letterform grammar, and a hand-assembled true-type font comes out, all inside the browser tab, without a server ever seeing your handwriting. As always, a link to the repo is in the description, along with the production web link where you can try it out yourself. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye!